So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and honestly to a very peculiar kind of map for reasons that will become apparent very, very quickly, I think, because this is one that we haven't seen before, and yet one that we have seen before. We're also going to be seeing an evil defence, which is always a little bit of a change-up. We usually see the forces of good on the defence, and it does offer a different dynamic, this, when evil is defending, and honestly I feel as though evil, just based on the way that most players tend to play, actually are a little bit easier to play on the defence in the current meta of the game, and that's not necessarily because of anything mechanical. It's because players who play on the side of good often get it into their heads that they need to go quality heavy regardless of what the situation is, and that often leaves them with a bit of a numbers deficit when it comes to doing the job that you have to do when you're on the attack in a siege like this, which is to generally fight and die in horrible circumstances in high numbers, which is kind of the modus operandi for a lot of the regular evil factions, and it's going to be a combination of Angmar and the Misty Mountains on the defence today. Just a word on the map itself. I don't know how much of the exterior of the Dwarven settlement we're going to be seeing, but we do have the lake here, and very quickly it will become very clear what the representation is here, because this is going to be where the Watcher usually is, because on the inside of this map it's at least a portion of Moria, including the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, which albeit is on the wrong side, I guess, based on what the map is supposed to be, and the map very brutally cuts itself off there, so you can see what is the rest of the Moria settlement under normal circumstances, which we will not be seeing. I don't know how much of the interior of Moria we're going to be seeing here today. I mean, it's kind of neat, I suppose, that we get to see a Battle of Moria with maybe a little bit of an exterior. I've never seen this map before. Even in other replays, I've never seen this one shown. I can only assume it was for a custom scenario of some sort at some time or another. But yeah, interesting. I mean, it's going to be a battle, I suppose, for a very steep hill initially, and then we may see what would be normal service resuming, I suppose, with Moria. I did say that the last time we'd see Moria would likely be the last time we'd ever see it in this form, given the fact that it is being reworked for the next patch, but I suppose I was technically telling the truth, given the fact that this is something we have never seen it used for in the past. Anyway, we'll go through the attackers first and foremost, as we often do, starting off with Seraphim, who's playing as the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm, trying to reclaim their home. I guess this can represent Balin's expedition and their allies. Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm, they do offer more of a long-range presence than anything that Erebor have to offer, albeit I don't know how the terrain is going to suit them here, because generally speaking the Misty Mountains and Angmar are very poor at long range, but that extreme gradient may yet prove to be their saving grace. Just in behind we do have the Guards of Khazad-dûm for that armour piercing. I mean, certainly when it comes to melee prowess, Khazad-dûm have got a lot of strengths at their disposal, and especially against factions like Angmar and the Misty Mountains, to be honest. Stuff like the Guards of Khazad-dûm are going to be very, very dominant. Indeed, a lot of the bodyguard tier units are. The Legion bodyguard don't really have anything too special about them in comparison to the other very high-end Khazad-dûm units, but they are a little bit cheaper, and they do still offer all of the really strong dwarven aspects that you'd expect, including very high armour and defence values. Just in behind, a plethora of pikes, including a couple of units of the regular pikemen, the Sentries of Khazad-dûm, which will be useful for just anchoring up a line. Again, will probably be one of the main targets for any defending skirmishers that they may perceive. But the First Legion pikes will certainly be so, because they're so dangerous in melee, especially against factions like the Misty Mountains, who don't have any pikes of their own to really fight that kind of warfare. First Legion pikes, of course, with armour piercing, in addition to all of the other very high tier stats that expensive dwarven infantry have. Second Legion Axe Guard, for all the reasons that we mentioned with the Guards of Khazad-dûm, armour piercing is going to be useful against the Angmarim and the Goblins of the Misty Mountains here, but obviously Second Legion Axe Guard are not quite as well rounded individually speaking as the Guards, but you can't build an army based on bodyguard tier units alone. A couple of units of them with the armour upgrade as well, just to help shore up their defensive values. Some regular infantry units in the Warriors of Khazad-dûm, which this is the sort of thing I was talking about. This is a very high tier dwarven army, which is fine if only a couple of the attackers are doing it. But one thing that the dwarves really do offer is really good regular units, and when you're on the attack you have to at least lean on this kind of unit a little bit. The Warriors of Khazad-dûm are easily going to be able to defeat the kind of regular units that Angmar and the Misty Mountains traffic in, so leaning on them more heavily is not necessarily the wrong thing to do. 3rd Legion Infantry are here also with an armour upgrade. They are of course the higher end unit of line infantry that can be brought. And then at the back, a couple of units of Khazad-dûm Reclaimers, which, especially if the battle does start to fall back within Moria a little bit more, to try and bust through any defensive positions the defenders may be trying to bottle the attackers up in. Axe throwers are one way that you can blow that wide open. Now then, moving on to the first of the allies. Interestingly enough, Mirkwood, Hidden Zed, so Thranduil is deciding to lend a hand here. Sindar the Girdle, actually a fairly wise choice given the fact that there is going to be, I would assume, some kind of outer defence here, and cavalry will be able to get in and around, maybe go after some very important targets, which we'll get onto when we go through the defenders. Hiri Peng, we've already mentioned how potentially the Gradient could do a lot of the heavy lifting for the defenders, at least in terms of mitigating the damage that the attacks are capable of doing, but Mirkwood certainly more so than Khazad-dûm, much more about that archer damage that they can lay down in the main. Hiriak, again, Mirkwood, just having a cursory glance over their army, this is another more quality heavy army, but Mirkwood have got fewer options in a siege capacity anyway than the dwarves do in terms of regular units that I think would be effective. Hiriak, on the other hand, with big shield values, are going to be a little bit more resilient to any missiles that they encounter going up the hill. More throwing projectiles, this time javelins in the form of the Woodland Protectors, good for busting through those stubborn defensive positions as well. Some regular units though, the Amenduir units for Mirkwood are still going to be good as long as they can get into melee without taking too much heavy damage. Blades of Amenduir going to be good at killing off especially low-end goblins en masse. Hiri Lang will also be good at that, but obviously heavy elven swordsmen have got some very high melee defense values to boot as well. Got some Elves of the Elven King with more Woodland Protectors. Obviously the Silverthorn arrows are more useful when the enemy is advancing towards you, but they could still cause a little bit of chaos, and then we've also seen this unit be very, very effective when it comes down to getting into melee as well. Hiri Lang, more Blades of Amenduir and more Hiriak, and some Ents, which, I mean, usually we see the Trolls filling this role on the attack. The Ents, very much the same kind of unit, and it will be interesting to see how they do here, because again, timing with these kinds of monstrous infantry units going to be everything. Moving on, we have Dale, played by Proxima Centauri, maybe a little bit more understandable that they would be in tow as the dwarves try to reclaim one of their ancient homes. Dalian Bowman, once again, Dale, of course, very much at home in terms of their archer play. They're in maybe a little bit better of an initial position with regards to the terrain that they're in as well, so Bardian Marksman and Dalian Bowman may be able to get better situated and put Angmar and the Misty Mountains under some more immediate pressure. Dalian Spearmen are a perfectly passable unit of defensive infantry, but other things are going to have to do the damage for the attackers here, but they can withstand a decent beating, and honestly against stuff like the goblins as well, they'll be just fine. But some of the higher tier Angmarim, for example, and maybe some Berserkers from the Misty Mountains, maybe the sort of thing to give them pause. Dalian Royal Guard, Dale of course have got two bodyguard archers, the Black Shots being the other one. Black Shots with that armour piercing as well at range, going to be very deadly. And the Dalian Paladins as well. Dale perhaps more at home as a slower burn when it comes to dealing their damage, but there are a few exceptions to that rule, especially when it comes to their armour piercing, which we've just gone through. Barding Herd as well offer them that solidity with a good unit of Phalanx infantry, but again, very much more of a focus around the fact that they are very heavily armoured in comparison to a lot of other halberdiers, so you do pay a little bit of a premium for that, but it does make them just that little bit more dependable when you need them to be. A catapult attacking artillery can always be something the defenders really do struggle with. Swordmasters of Esgaroth as well, maybe not as strong, well, certainly not as strong as the equivalent Elven units we've already seen, but another unit model from Vanilla. They do still exist within the game. Very often we see the Swordmasters get upgraded, but not so here. And last but not least, we've already mentioned them briefly, played by Filler, the Dwarves of Erebor in tow with Balin and their expedition here. More cavalry in the shape of the Ironfoot Hammer Guard, so they do have a couple of units of bodyguard cavalry which can be used for finding those gaps if the defenders are not paying attention. Some miners, low tier units, but at least they do have that armour piercing. Ironfoot Spears, regular Dwarven units, the Ironfoots in the case of Erebor should be pretty effective at what they do. Plenty of warriors as well, so I like this army from Filler because he has decided to go for maybe a little bit more of a contingent of the basic units, backed up as well by the Ironfoot Pikes, as they are going to try and take advantage of some Phalanx warfare. Ironfoot Crossbows, the only unit of the attackers, the only army among the attackers that have access to these crossbows, very nice armor-piercing damage that they can deal too. A couple of units of axe throwers, we've already mentioned axe throwers, but the reclaimers are obviously stronger than the regular Ironfoot ones, but they should still do a good job. Axe Guard of Erebor for some more armor piercing in the shape of the Blacklocks as well, and of course the very deadly Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin. Now then, for the attackers, starting off with Tommy the Wise, who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him, playing as one of the Misty Mountains armies today as they are squatting in the Dwarf's home. Heavy Goblin Archers, so he has decided to go with some archers, maybe trying to take advantage of this terrain, and maybe with the knowledge that he is going to have to engage in some kind of long-range warfare, because the likes of Dale and Mirkwood, there's no way that they're not going to bring a decent archer presence, so just something to meet them with. A combination of Heavy Goblin Spears and Halberds on the front line is the most cost-effective front line that the Misty Mountains can field, and as this is a 4v4, the Misty Mountains are going to have to leverage the fact that they can field a big army for a lower amount of money. Armor piercing as well is going to be useful against every attacking faction universally, except maybe for Mirkwood. There's some Warg Skirmishers as well, so more mobility for the defenders to utilise, but they're going to have to be careful of the very high quality attacking cavalry. Snaga Skirmishers in behind as well to help do some more armor piercing damage, so low tier armor piercing units here so far, but in high numbers, and that's perhaps how the Misty Mountains is going to have to approach things. Mountain Orc Berserkers. Locked Morale is a surprisingly useful feature of theirs, even though they don't necessarily stay alive for that long given their very low defensive values. Heavy Goblin Crossbows, of course, crossbows, the sort of thing which can really be leveraged here given the fact they've got higher terrain, so the lack of range in comparison to some of the attacking archers may not be such a problem for them. Blackback Mountain Berserkers, defensive artillery as well. We could see an early artillery duel here, but I think the Misty Mountains are positioned a little bit better for such things. Regular Goblin Infantry, and then the very deadly, actually, Bolgs Champions, who should be able to go toe-to-toe with the attacking cavalry. Now then, moving on to the second Misty Mountains army, commanded by Joran, get my words out. More Heavy Goblin Spears for that armor piercing, going for a little bit more quality perhaps with the Mountaineer at coast, but there's nothing wrong with that. They will be better at holding the line against the level of opposition they're going to be facing here. And then moving on, we have some more Heavy Goblin Halberds, a cheap phalanx unit, but one that will hold the line well enough as long as they're supported for a time anyway. More Berserkers, more Snaga Skirmishers, and we've got some more Heavy Goblin Crossbows as well. Going to be a big part of the Misty Mountains defence, this, I would imagine. And then there's another proportionate portion of the army as well, which is already going to be pulling back. A couple of Heavy Goblin Spears, the White Uruk Fearmongers, a much stronger version of the Halberds we've already spoken about, Blackback Berserkers, and some Snaga Skirmishers as well. So future-proofing a little bit. None of them are within the settlement right from the off. Dieth the Warlord playing as one of the Angmar armies, Witchram Scourge Raiders, so some defensive axe throwers as well. They're pretty decent in melee as well. Not the sort of unit which is going to be able to solo some of the higher tier Dwarven and Elven units on the field, but they can at least compete, and that's all that you can really ask of some of these skirmishers, especially playing as an evil faction. Witchram Blackguard can certainly compete at the highest level, however. They will still lose to the best of the Dwarven and Elven units available, but very, very tough unit indeed. Witchram Inquisitors, so there is going to be a bit of a cavalry back and forth here, you would imagine, given the fact that the only cavalry really on the field is either high tier or javelin cavalry, so it's going to be a bit of a duel there. A very bold place to put your Witches of Angmar, because they are exposed, and I would imagine, if at all possible, the attackers will want to assassinate them very quickly. Angmar Halberds, pretty much the same sort of thing as the Heavy Goblin Halberds, a cheap phalanx, but certainly not the most effective, especially in the Angmarim roster. Some Gundabad Guard as well. Moving on to the fourth and final army, it is going to be Tiers Niehoff, who's going to be playing as another Misty Mountains army actually, so only one Angmarim force. Snaga Skirmishers, more Heavy Goblin Crossbows, so again going to be relying on some armor-piercing missiles. The Drake Broodlings are an interesting choice. If they can steer clear of those high damage projectiles the attackers have, as well as their cavalry, they could cause some chaos, but the Drake Broodlings are a kind of all-or-nothing unit. They'll either be very, very effective or next to useless. That tends to be how it goes with them. Goblin Infantry, Black Uruks, we've seen them a few times in the past couple of months actually be a very solid unit of infantry for the Misty Mountains. Can they be so again against this level of opposition? We shall see. Goblin Archers, more Blackbacks, more Bolgs Champions. So actually the level of cavalry here is maybe slightly in the defenders' favour overall, which may prove to be a bit of a problem for the attackers having to march uphill all this way. Very fast snow trolls, we've got some heavy goblin infantry, so you can see that based on some of the more specialty units that Niehoff has had to go for, he's had to substitute some units for very basic goblins, but it is what it is, they will still get in the way. And some white Uruk Fearmongers as well, black Uruks, and more heavy goblins, including some crossbows, but mainly just regular goblin infantry. I don't know how quickly this battle will get underway, hopefully fairly fast given the presence of cavalry on the field. Yeah, this should be an interesting one, a different take on Moria this. So yeah, without further ado, let's get this. So we do appear to be getting underway in more of a consistent manner now. There has been a little bit of cavalry poking around, but nothing too substantial. This though, the Warg Skirmishers are going to charge directly into some unprotected Dalian bowmen as they try to set up a firing line to deal with the forces that have positioned themselves outside the gates, and the attackers have also very clearly identified the terrain as a real problem for them over on the other side of the battlefield, so all of the armies are going to try attacking from this angle where the gradients are a little bit less severe, which is all well and good, but it does have the effect of slightly limiting the battlefield, which tends to be a good thing for defenders, albeit in this case, because it is a 4v4, the quality advantage will be, individually speaking, in favour of the attackers, so maybe it will work for them as well. A little bit of a different dynamic here than it would be in a 5v3 Woodland Realm patrol moving forward. Going to be taking some pot shots as well, and this is the kind of warfare that honestly the attackers will certainly prefer with the ranged firepower that they have at their disposal. The defenders will have plenty of disposable units that they can throw under the bus, for lack of a better term. Having said that, I'm still not too convinced that they can afford to just sit here and accept this punishment. Dalian bowmen getting very close to the front line, sort of thing which cavalry could deal with. The other thing that did happen was further down here there was a charge from one of the units of Bolg's champions into a straggler unit of dwarves, but as much as they did kill a few dwarves, they also slightly clipped those stakes there. So, a bit of a mixed bag, you'd have to say. I hope that this isn't just a slow but sure retreat back into Moria itself. I hope we do see a significant battle outside of Moria, considering that is what will differentiate this from a standard Moria siege as we have come to know it. I think the presence of the cavalry kind of necessitates that though. Heavy Goblin Archers starting to return fire. If you're going to invest this much in cavalry as defenders, you need to be able to utilise them, and the interior of Moria is one of the least appealing places to try and use cavalry like that. Skirmishing back and forth now, but as I already mentioned in the composition phase, this is a theatre of warfare that Dale are very familiar with. And they are going to be quite comfortable at withstanding punishment from standard and heavy Goblin Archers. Dalian bowmen will do the business, and perhaps this is why the battle is going to be a slightly longer affair. The attackers want this kind of battle to start off with, and the defenders' options for forcing them to take different tactics are going to be somewhat limited. Cavalry is really the thing, but the attackers have thought of that also, with the defensive screen of stuff like the Hammer Guard and the Sindar of the Girdle. Expensive units, yes, but it's going to make the passage of the Bolg's champions significantly more difficult. Ironfoot Spear's artillery starting to make its appearance as well. Flaming shot, a very decent hit actually, right into the middle of those heavy Goblin halberds, and also getting some of those Warg Skirmishers as well. I think they are actually going after the catapult. If you're going to snipe out enemy artillery, you should be using standard shot really, but the fact that there are so many units around here to hit means that even if you go wide or long with the catapult, you're probably going to hit something. And as we've already seen, those are all pretty decent hits. Hitting the Mountain Orc Berserkers as well. Yeah, the defenders are going to have to do something here. They can't afford to just sit back and allow this kind of punishment to menace their lines forever. Otherwise, even with their ample stores of goblins, they will find themselves both outnumbered and outgunned come the late game. Again, another decent hit, this time into another block of heavy Goblin halberds actually. Goblin infantry hidden and waiting. The defending catapult now also starting to fire, and the terrain is on their side, so they should have greater range. And again, some decent hits. right into the midst of the Legion units there, which is good for them, and also hitting the Elders of the Elven King. Not a significant amount of the unit gone, but each one of those is worth an awful lot, so going to give the attackers a taste of their own medicine here, as the artillery, unfortunate there for the defenders, whereas the attacking artillery, you could see in the distance once again, managed to hit. Again, like, look at the amount of hillside that the attacking artillery has got to aim for, that it's going to hit something. There's going to be some value coming from that catapult. You can also hear the mechanical twang of some crossbows now, however, with the advancing of some of the attacking infantry. For now, it's only some dwarven miners going up against a somewhat sacrificial line of heavy goblin spears. But that's enough for the attackers so far. They are winning the ranged game, after all, as you would expect. And with the artillery also doing bits, bringing forward just an initial probing assault, it is about the right time. So I like the way the attackers are approaching this battle so far. They're using their strengths, but they're also pressing an advantage when they see it. Of course, the reinforcements for this initial push are a little bit far away, so if it does start to collapse quickly, they will lose all of this ground, but not necessarily a terrible thing. The artillery still firing back and forth, as we see in the distance there. Once again, some grazing hits this time, perhaps, from the attacking artillery. Some fortuitous ones for the defending one. Blades of Emondui are not the most important unit in the world to the attackers, but defenders will just take whittling down the attacking infantry for later at this point, I think. Yeah, they are definitely going after the defending catapult here, and they did hit one, but for the most part they are still hitting other things. The dwarven miners now also being engaged by a unit of heavy goblin infantry moving forward, just shoring up the line of the heavy goblin spears. But you can see here the heavy goblin spears very thinly spread, and the armour piercing of the dwarven miners, there may be a militia tier unit among the dwarves, but the armour piercing will help them against those heavy goblin spears. And then the goblin infantry are so poor that the dwarven miners should still be just fine. It's at the sides of these front lines where the goblin infantry is doing their thing. Mercenary crossbowmen moving forward. I don't know whether that was intended to be a charge into the goblins or not, but those spears will do a number on those mercenary crossbowmen. They are a very fragile unit after all. The Ironfoot spears are shaken because they're more isolated from their allies. The Bolgs champions seeing an opportunity to close down the Merc crossbows, and this is they got a fair amount of punch, those mounted crossbowmen, so if you can finish them off before they can use much of their ammunition at all, that can only be a good thing. Elves are going to help shore up the dwarven front line over here. That will stabilise the situation for the Ironfoot spears, but there is more of a significant presence over here for the Misty Mountains. Heavy goblin spears, once again the initial front line, with the support of the goblin infantry coming in, but they also have Mountain Uruk Host backing them up. A far tougher prospect for any attacking infantry as they move forward. The artillery is still taking pot shots at one another's back line, the consequences for which will build up over time. Blades of Emondui are also moving forward over here, and they are making more headway here, the attackers, causing the heavy goblin spears to break, and the goblin infantry is not far behind them, so the dwarven miners can continue their progress forward. These front lines were always going to be a temporary thing. Dalian bowmen moving a little bit closer now. Those Bolgs champions are looking pretty menacing in behind the lines. Ironfoot spears are routing as well, so maybe they did get a charge off when we weren't looking there. The dwarves starting to run, so differing fortunes here. One part of the line, the defenders standing firm and causing the ranks of the attackers to falter, whereas on the other side the attackers are starting to make progress towards the doors of Durin. Sindar of the Girdle over there, I think they're playing chase with the Bolgs champions. Indeed they are, and there's also Mirkwood spears nearby, so this isn't really the kind of environment the Bolgs champions want to be in. Those Ironfoot Hammer Guard are very depleted at this point, but they are very much outgunned. But the Tram Inquisitors coming in, that makes the engagement a little bit more interesting. The Inquisitors will need the continued support of the Bolgs champions if they are to be completely successful here, I think, because of the presence of those spears on their way forwards as well. could prove to be a problem for them. Blades of Amenduir are routing off, so that front line doing quite nicely. Heavy Goblin Archers, Dalian Bowmen routing, maybe sent forward a little bit too quickly. The attackers, those miners also routing, so the attacker's not able to carry through into this position just yet. The artillery still doing its thing. Ironfoot Warriors moving forward, so that's another column of Erebor infantry which will be taking on the responsibility of engaging with the enemy. As we see the artillery shots go long once again, hitting, grazing hit only on the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers, but there are strong enough units to warrant being targeted certainly. Volk's champions charging into some Orc Hunters, trying to alleviate some of the archer pressure that the attackers have been able to put on the defenders so far. Warriors are here standing in the way of the archers, but even here, like, Volk's champions won't mind if they have to charge into warriors of Khazad-dûm. More infantry ripe for the taking. Blades of Amenduir are kind of isolated here with the Dwarven miners. Those heavy goblin spears, maybe they return from routing. They are certainly pretty heavily depleted as it stands. There's a lot of halberdiers just in behind the line. There's plenty of shuffling that the defenders can do. They've set up a bit of a V-shaped front line over here as the spears and Mirkwood archers that were following their cavalry around, as well as some regrouping Ironfoot spears, could start attacking from the other side, though as we mentioned the gradient over here is less appealing to the attackers, but I do think they need to try and stretch the battlefield a little bit. Ironfoot warriors now do arrive on the front line. That catapult crew now moving forward, so we're going to see less of the artillery from now on. I think both sides have already plumbed the depths of their ammunition in that regard. But here we have the heavy goblin spears and halberdier front line, and the armour upgraded and unupgraded Ironfoot warriors alone without any sort of backup. That phalanx from the halberds might be enough to really cause a problem for the dwarves here, and there is a little bit of ranged support coming in as well, so I'm not convinced Erebor are going to make the kind of inroads they need to here. They're going to need some support from their allies. And on this flank as well, more of a substantial problem. Mountain Orc Coast and Mountain Orc Berserkers. Morale is something of an issue for both sides so far, which is kind of surprising from an attacker perspective, but even from the defenders as well. I mean, they're not really losing this battle, so I'm surprised that they're already thinking about maybe running away. This will cause a little bit more of an issue for the defending infantry. Axguard of Erebor, with those big armour-piercing attacks that they have, are going to be especially effective against those heavy goblin spears that they can more easily reach in melee. But seeing that, the Snaga skirmishers in behind, all of those javelins, targeting them down, trying to do some significant damage to them before they can make too much progress. Axe throwers are there, ready to move forward and support as well. Out of ammunition, Orc Hunters, not a terrible melee combatant, but things are looking a little bit thin on the ground here. I think if the attackers are going to move forward in these kind of numbers, they're going to need to do so with quite a lot. There is another wave coming forward now from Khazad-dûm, some Mirkwood units also following through. It's a little bit stretched, this assault though, and that is the sort of thing which the defenders could use to their advantage. This Ironfoot front line could start to collapse before the reinforcements arrive, but it's going to be a close run thing. And I think reinforcements have arrived on the front line quickly enough so that the quality of the defending goblins is going to be called into question here as well. The halberdiers are doing a decent effort here to try and hold on, but more reinforcements are going to be required for the goblins if they are to be successful. Doing a better job over here. The arrival of the sentries, however, also means now that the phalanx battle is going to be contested, and that's really the thing which the defenders are leaning on pretty heavily here. Elven units also starting to make an appearance on the front, lurching forwards a little bit as some heavy goblin spears and infantry trying to do the business against the First Legion pikes, and the First Legion pikes are also being targeted down by all manner of projectiles. Based on the fact that they're dying off pretty quickly, some of those projectiles must be crossbow bolts. And rightly so. This is exactly the kind of unit which, especially late on when the battle transitions to the interior of the Dwarven Mine, First Legion could be exactly the sort of unit which could cause some serious problems. Angmar Halberds alongside some Goblin Band, that is a ragtag front line. And also it's being attacked from the side, so a good amount of the effectiveness of those Halberds is going to be compromised. Not brilliant battlefield awareness there from the defenders. They do have an opportunity to try and salvage the situation, but the only reinforcements they've got close by are Snaga Stalkers, so we'll see how effective that's going to be. Their Snaga brethren, though, in the Snaga skirmishers, have almost certainly racked up a pretty decent kill count for themselves so far, as the attackers have to make their way through a hailstorm of javelins. They may not be the best javelins in the game, but from sheer volume here, they will be very effective, especially against the Dwarven infantry, to try and give their own infantry the best chance of holding on for as long as possible. And you can actually see that the Dwarves are starting to look a little bit thin on the ground when it comes to what they've got left here. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on this as the battle moves forwards. Heavy Goblin Halberds, another unit of them coming in to try and shore up the front line for a little bit longer, give these missile units a chance to rack up more of an impressive kill count for themselves. Victory over here, which, I mean, this is the part of the front line where the Mountain Orc Berserkers were present, so it's not too surprising to see the fact that the attackers have struggled a little bit more infantry-wise, where they've got a solid unit of armour-piercing infantry, which they've now got in the middle as well, which will cause problems, especially for these Ironfoots from Erebor. In behind as well, Gundabad Guard could move forward as well to help shore up the front line. A decent line-holding unit, not necessarily going to be fantastic at dealing damage, even with their stolen Dwarven implements. But it'll be enough to shore things up for the time being. Orc Hunters, in some areas you can see some significant defensive units starting to flag, and eventually the attackers will make their way through here, but it's just whether or not it will have been worthwhile in the long run. Whether or not it costs them too much to break the spirit of the goblin-led defence out here. Legion Bodyguard, a lot of javelins hitting them now as well, so target choice by the defenders for their projectiles has been good, and that's one of the things which can always affect the defenders' chances of winning a battle like this. Their line building has been pretty solid as well. They need to be careful though, because I mean they've managed to stabilise the situation over here. Snaga skirmishers were enough. Of course the Barrow Wights can be a real pain to deal with for any army, and especially if you have to attack into them, because they're going to stand and fight for basically ever. That's something which the attackers will have to take into consideration. Something else which they'll probably have to take into consideration, of course, are the Witchers, which did pull back. We shall have to wait and see if they prove to be a significant factor in this battle or not. It looks like they're going to try and pull back to the settlement here. They've had enough outside the goblins. This is where the attackers could really do some damage. These transitional phases in sieges, as I often say, often turn out to be where the attackers can really open up a bit of an advantage, and this I think is going to be no different. Dalian spearmen moving forward will make the job of any cavalry here a little bit more tricky. The cavalry routes, however, so it doesn't really matter. Heavy goblin crossbows, how much ammunition do they have left? From a defending perspective, you'd hope none. This is exactly the kind of resource they can't afford to be flippant with. Alien spearmen moving forwards, the Khazad-dûm reclaimers with their axes drawn. More Khazad-dûm reclaimers are over here as well, so having to use projectiles that maybe they prefer to be saving for inside Moria early to try and break the spirit of this clutch of Gundabad guards more quickly. Try and get as much efficiency out of the retreating defenders as they possibly can. Another volley of throwing axes there. Sundar of the Girdle in behind enemy lines now as well. This is a perfect opportunity really for the cavalry. And it's interesting actually that the Barrow Wights were being committed to the front line, and then the decision has been made to pull back, maybe not to the interior of the settlement, but at least to a narrower position in front of the doors. But this means the Barrow Wights are probably going to be charged into oblivion here, because their movement speed is very slow. They will not be able to retreat as quickly as all of their fellow combatants. Perhaps a problem. Snaga Stalkers, Goblin Band. So still some defending infantry over on the other side to make its way back. Even the lowliest unit will need to play its part in melee towards the late game, you would fear. Yeah, those Barrow Wights surrounded, although they will act as a bit of a lightning rod, a blob perhaps, those Snaga archers routing under the charge of those Sindar of the Girdle there. Now perhaps a downhill charge into the rear of the Barrow Wights. Try and deal with them as quickly as possible. Not the best charge from the Sindar of the Girdle, a little bit pedestrian, but the lances were down, so the charge did connect at the very least. Second Legion Axe Guard on the way across as well. They're going to need to commit a little bit more to comprehensively defeat the Barrow Wights, but Mirkwood, their infantry perhaps is a little bit better suited for dealing with such things in the first place. Sindar the Girdle in a little bit of danger here of being surrounded by Goblin Band. Last thing they need is to be giving the defenders an efficient victory like that as they try to bulldoze their way through some Snaga Stalkers. Heavy Goblin Infantry. There's a lot of low-end units here, isn't there, that the defenders are going to be dependent upon, but perhaps the key part of that phrase is a lot of low-end infantry units. A lot for the attackers to try and mulch their way through. Orc Fellas on the front line, a little bit more armour piercing. The initial probing assault here being launched by Iron for Axe Throwers. Out of ammunition, you would assume. They're not really going to achieve anything all on their lonesome here against the secondary front line that has been set up by the defenders. Lost half their men, have they? Khazad-dûm Reclaimers throwing projectiles in. Oof, that is vicious. The attacking artillery still has some ammunition. Of the two artillery pieces, it was definitely the most effective, at least from what we saw, unless I missed something significant. But that is a problem, and that is enough to really convince the defenders to reposition their entire front line, which they only just really finished setting up. But they can't afford to stay there if they're going to take that kind of damage. Especially considering the kind of units that are here are very likely to rout under continuous artillery hits. That is a problem for them. I don't know how much ammunition the attacking catapult has left, considering the defending one ran out of ammunition. I can't imagine it's very much. That may have been their last hurrah, for lack of a better term. Orcans of Khazad-dûm are routing. The Barrow Wights doing a decent job still. But they are going up against aggressive infantry, including the 2nd Legion, which is ultimately the kind of unit that you need to commit if you're going to go infantry to infantry with them and you want to get rid of them at anything other than a glacial pace. So there we have it. Still projectiles coming in. Heavy Goblin crossbows. I mean, this is the thing. This is what makes a battle like this somewhat difficult to judge as we go forward. Yes, the attackers are making progress, but how much damage are they truly taking at the hands of the javelins and the crossbow bolts as they move forward? Because that's going to be the difference maker here. If it comes down to sheer quality in melee, of course the attackers will turn the defenders back, but they have limited manpower. Are they going to be able to see it through? Also, as we start to move back towards Moria itself, that is a very defensible position, as we have learned several times in the past. The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. Usually we see that part of the settlement utilised in the early stages of a Moria battle, but to see it be the finale, will that give the defenders the position they need to make it impossible for the attackers, perhaps? A weakness found in the front line, immediately plugged by a unit of Orc Fellas that desperately charges forward into the advancing dwarves, and also some Bardian marksmen to back up the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers. The Orc Fellas surely will not last long under this kind of pressure. Indeed, they're already shaken. Greenwood Watchers are also going to be utilising their throwing daggers. And this is key. As much as we just mentioned the javelins and the crossbow bolts for the defenders, the other factor to consider is the attacking ranged units. We saw in the very early game, of course, the slow open with the archers but also stuff like the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers, Greenwood Watchers, high damage projectiles, which can really do a number on a defensive line, especially if it's in the wrong position and it's exposed. Not too much of a problem here, you would say, so far. Angmar Halberds filling the role that the Heavy Goblin Halberds did earlier, trying to be the linchpin of a front line which is trying to punch well above its weight. You can see Ironfoot Pikes, though, being on the front line, as well as some sentries of Khazad-dûm. They're going to be outranged, which means what the defenders are trying to do, efficiency-wise, is going to be counteracted by the composition of the attacking front line. Real mixture of units in there, though. Khazad-dûm Reclaimers, the Ironfoots, the sentries. Some Bardings from Dale as well, doing their part on the front line. Bardian Marksmen double as decent infantry units after all, and against the kind of foe they're facing off against here, this is where they can actually showcase their intended abilities in melee. So that's good. Ooh, dear oh dear. Just missed that. As I pan back, the absolute carnage that has been unleashed. Interestingly enough, it did do friendly fire as well, so it has also caused a mass rout for the defenders as well as the attackers. The Witchers doing what they do, especially in a more congested engagement like that. Some of those defenders will probably come back. The more substantial units of Heavy Goblin Infantry will likely come back, although they could actually be hunted to extinction by those Sindar of the Girdle. If the Mirkwood player is paying attention here, they could, usually what is a campaign behaviour, to try and kill fleeing units, it could actually have a real impact here, because that's a substantial amount of infantry the Sindar of the Girdle can hunt down. So, as much as the Witchers did an awful lot of damage to the attackers there, they've also inadvertently done quite a bit of damage to their own army. Although this is going to be maybe another... Surely they're being shot, but yeah. And trying to get in position to do it again to this section of the front line, but that's weird. That's probably the most 50-50 volley from the Witchers that I've ever seen. You have to utilise them if you have them, of course, but that was an awful lot of friendly fire they got as well. I think based on the quality of the attacking infantry, it was still probably a net gain. That was certainly a net gain. But definitely a bit of a grey area there. I mean, continuing to do an awful lot of damage here. They need to try and do something here. Witchers taking damage, but they're dishing out damage at such a pace. I do think it's a bit much. I think that they need to be changed, because you can play abysmally as Angmar, and utilising your Witchers well is enough to completely turn a battle like that. So I would argue that, yeah, something probably needs to be done about them moving into the next patch, because as much as they can cause a bit of jeopardy, and most of the time we see them utilised, the opposition can deal with them. But they have been being shot there, and while they have fallen away pretty quickly, the amount of damage they've delivered in return is disproportionate, really. So, yeah. I mean, it's not the sort of thing that you would look at the battlefield now and go, well, the attackers simply cannot win, because the defending front line was made up of such low quality, and they've crumbled in the face of the attacking infantry, that it's not necessarily so. But if the defenders do go on to win this, you'd have to say it will be on the back, at the very least, of the Witcher panic button. The attackers, looking at what they have left, they do have an army left to give, including some decent units, Dragon Slayers, crossbows of their own, and Blacklocks. A good clutch of units from Dale as well, some heavy swordsmen. Wardens of Ammon Lank, so good quality units, in decent numbers as well. So there we have it. Black Uruks of the mountains, being caught before they can retreat to the relative safety. At least some of them will be. Black Uruks will be a very important unit for the defenders going into the late game here. We've already seen the low and standard tier units be swept aside by Dwarven, Elven and human hands. Black Uruks, however, provide a more substantial challenge as we move to more familiar terrain within here. Now, I can only assume, we're not seeing this battle from their perspective, but I can only assume the Sindar of the Girdle have racked up a simply monstrous kill count by simply killing fleeing units. And under normal circumstances, that would be like padding out your stats really, but actually, from Hidden Zed's cavalry, it's been a very, very wise thing to do to prevent units that would have returned from returning. So the cavalry here, in a pretty unorthodox way, I would say, for a multiplayer battle, very typical for a campaign battle, but they will prove to be a very sound investment here indeed. I think these Woodland Protectors were routing, and I think these units were also routing over here, so units that have decided to return, immediately facing off against one another in mortal combat. The numbers of the Snaga and the Goblins here should be enough to deal with a unit of relatively fragile Elven Spears, you would think. Further afield, Sindar of the Girdle, continuing to charge in, continuing now to, at least they're being made to work a little bit more now that these units that they're charging into are not immediately routing, but they will still get a hefty amount of kills there. The Elven Cavalry, the Ents still need to be utilised as well. Going into the late game, they could be very, very useful for breaking up a front line. The first foray into Khazad-dûm as the Dwarves hoping to be the first to reclaim their home, but they're going to be mobbed by a bunch of halberds, so it's not going to end for them, perhaps, in the way that they would have liked. Now moving forward, some First Legion pikes, but only 6 of them. The Greenwood Watchers moving in. Are they going to try and utilise their throwing daggers? They are. At the Snaga skirmishers as well, so once again we're seeing the defending javelins be a bit of a difference maker here. And further in, Kelduin River Patrol in melee, of course, are dreadful, but they do offer more numbers, and they also offer the kind of target which the defenders won't really be wanting to use their ammunition on. Certainly a taste of their own medicine when it comes to the way that the Misty Mountains usually approach battles. What's going on out here still then? Sindar of the Girdle getting a nice charge here once again, trying to support what very little remains of this unit of Woodland Protectors. And the Goblin Crossbowmen and Iron for Axe Throwers facing off against one another. Again, more units which I believe were routing and then returned and decided to immediately set about one another. But the Heavy Goblin Crossbows are terrible in melee, the Iron for Axe Throwers, on the back more so of their equipment, are certainly to a higher standard in melee than their Goblin counterparts here. And now another charge from the Sindar of the Girdle. And that is going to be enough to once again rout these units, and I'm sure the Sindar of the Girdle will oblige themselves by feasting upon yet more kills. It's a shame we're not going to see their kill count actually. We're going to be seeing the kill count instead of one of the defenders. Again, the front line now being reinforced by these Black Uruks, like I said, going to be one of the more important units for the defenders here, more capable of standing toe-to-toe with the kind of opposition they're going to have to be going up against. Keldon River Patrol now being shored up as well by some Dalian spears as they make their way into Moria. More Black Uruks on the way forward, the Snaga skirmishers still offering the odd javelin or two in support of this front line. Small quality from the attackers will be needed, I think, to start making more genuine progress here. Lumberman, maybe not what I had in mind, but at least it offers a little bit of armour-piercing bite, I suppose. And I suppose this is also, it may not be the final 10,000 frames just yet, but this is really the final phase of the battle. The long march through Moria. They have a lot of numbers still at their back, the defenders, but I mean a fair amount of it is still relatively low quality, but the White Uruks are a very good line holding unit. The The Blackbacks are still here. The Snow Trolls act as a pretty decent counterpoint to the Ents, which are still on the attacking side. The Blackguard are here. They can't retreat all the way to the other side of Moria, of course, as we've already seen. There is a limit to what will happen here. The Ents are coming in, so... I mean, based on the reinforcements both sides still have, I imagine this is going to turn into a bit of a violent bloodbath towards the end, where both sides simply slam together and see what falls out. Which is fair enough. I mean, from an attacking perspective, there's not really much else you can do based on where the battle is taking place at the entry point to Moria. Ents going to maybe try and retreat here. I mean, it was never really fertile terrain for the Ents to be in the first place. The Black Uruks are a decent counterpoint to that kind of unit. There are also Blackbacks in there, however, which are a far more worrying sight, you would suggest. And as soon as they come into Moria, they're met with yet another horde. Worrying signs if you were here hoping to reclaim this dwarven land. Orc fellas. Adding yet more armour-piercing bites to this front line, which will be a problem to all except Mirkwood, really. This really is the only front line at this point, so it's going to turn into one of these battles. So ×2 speed it shall have to be. The only engagement as it takes place on the battlefield now. White Uruk Fearmongers in decent numbers, actually, and that will prove to be a concern. By far the best line-holding unit that is on the field. This is an interesting choice as well. The Drake Broodlings breaking this attacking force, and it's looking like the defenders are seizing the initiative in this battle. I don't think the attackers have the strength here to withstand quite an aggressive push that from the more monstrous units the Misty Mountains have available when they're backed up by the best anchor that they have in the White Uruks. Worrying times for the attackers. Snugger in and amongst things, so it's not an entirely high quality front line. There are potential pitfalls that the defenders could still fall into, but you have to say it's looking a little bit dicey for them now. So Khazad Reclaimers moving in, the occasional throwing axe volley as well from the Scourge Raiders, which are still there. Scourge Raiders, of course, perfectly capable of mucking in melee as well. As the battle draws to its conclusion and more reinforcements and fodder for the front line will be required, they can fill that role quite nicely. Bit of steam running out for the defending front line now, though. Perhaps this kind of attrition will favour the quality in the end. Speaking of which, the Scourge Raiders ready to lend a hand there. This is a very classic example of what tends to happen on Moria, though at least on the other version of Moria you can flit back and forth between both sides, whereas here, because it is literally only one engagement, ×2 speed is really the only thing. We'll go back down to ×1 speed a little bit to try and get in amongst the guts of this fight for just a moment. There is a Dwarven General right in and amongst things. I can't imagine he's going to last too long after a general was already lost fighting on the front line. Barding Herd, certainly not the worst unit to commit to the front line, honestly. As we've already said, they are a tanky halberdier, and the armour piercing will also be useful. The Dragon Slayers are here. What remains of the Blackbacks is honestly 37 of them, so they have taken a bit of a beating. They may be a dual wielding unit, but they are still one of the more fragile bodyguard units that can be committed. The Swordmasters coming in from Dale, a little bit more of a damage spike as well. The Catapult crew, which the attacking catapult was definitely a worthwhile investment, and the Ents are coming back, so a little moment of intent here perhaps from the attackers. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Still, the defenders, too thick of a front line perhaps. I mean, the Ents are really burrowing into this front line, but there's a limit to how far they're going to get, and even if they do get in amongst the polearm units, the armour piercing on the White Uruks is still going to be enough to cause the Ents some significant problems, you would think. Blacklock Engineers trying to do their thing. They're going to have to loop their shots, but I don't think they have too much of a choice here. There goes the Dwarven General, as we saw the Scourge Raiders starting to take a little bit of damage. Back come the Drake Broodlings. We saw them use to really good effect, actually. They have to barrel through their own units to do so, but the morale shot they impacted on the attackers last time was very, very good. Very much a feast or famine kind of unit, the Drake Broodlings, and so far it's proven to be the former for the defenders, used to very good effect there to once again cause absolute bedlam among the defending lines as we check outside to see what they still have in reserve. Some River Patrol with Javelins still available to them, more Swordmasters, who I think are going to be committed forward now. The Dalian Paladins are a very strong unit. There's a Snow Troll out here in and amongst the Wardens of Amon-Lank. Dalian Royal Guard, so some strong units still to go, but they can't afford to have only elite units left really, because they're small and more easily bottled up. They're going to need some more quality on the front line a little bit more readily, I think, the attackers. The problem is the defending front line still looks very well set. Another unit of Swordmasters gets committed. I'd like to see a bodyguard tier unit moved in here as well to help really deal with the units in front of this front line. All of these Snaga and I mean, there are blackbacks in here, but it is mostly low-end units. So if you were to send forward something like the Dalian Royal Guard as well, you would start to mop them up pretty quickly. Start to do the business. Have a look. It's very close. The defenders have lost 2% more, but they still have the... well, the defensive position is what's maybe going to give them an edge. They've still got some blackbacks, which are on Blackguard. The quality of the attackers is undoubtedly higher. Is the front line shored up by all those White Uruks in the defensive position going to be enough to hold the attacking quality at bay? That really is going to be the difference maker here. I imagine, based on the amount of frames left, the attackers are going to go all in at some point to try and test what the defenders truly have left in reserve. Dalian Royal Guard moving in, so we are starting to see a bodyguard unit or two. Ironfoot crossbows trying to get into place. Not as easy a task for them to get good shots as the heavy goblins had in the initial stages of this battle. In come the Drake Broodlings once again, making less progress this time, and each swing of a Dalian Royal Guard sword represents a big problem. In come the Wardens of Amon-Lank with their axes as well, so the Drake Broodlings will be more difficult to use as this battle grinds on. Snaga Skirmishers still doing their thing, still trying to get as much done with those javelins as they're able to, but I don't know, with Blacklock Engineers now moving in as well, what sort of angle are they going to have available to them? Again, they're having to loop their shots. Not ideal from their perspective. The Witchers are there, still alive, covered in mud and blood. But one good shot from them against bodyguard tier units, and they are reloading. Is the crutch going to be utilised again? They've been seen, so you would think not. Yeah, the amount of damage they've taken, they've got one more unit which is capable of firing off the green beams of death. Many more hits like that and he will fall. Yeah, they really want him dead, unsurprisingly. Retreating back through the Snaga, who offer a javelin volley in return. Scourge Raiders. Still, the all or nothing committal of units has not transpired. Further back, Blackbacks retreat. The Witch Realm Blackguard can move forward as well. Very solid unit, of course. As we mentioned, Guards of Khazad-dûm are moving in here, hoping to reclaim their home, most certainly. That armour piercing, burrowing in and amongst the White Uruks. Are they going to go all in? Or are they simply going to try and wear the defenders down? I'm not really sure one way or the other here. Hits coming in from the Black Bloc Engineers as well. Keldon River Patrol is not the next unit I thought would be coming through those doors. Woodland Protectors as well. I mean, the frames are dwindling ever further. Just having a look. Yeah, it's starting to go more and more in favour of the attackers. What was 2% has now become 3%. These are small margins, but based on the quality that the attackers still have left, that bodes ill for the defenders. We'll see. Keldon River Patrol, I mean, they still have javelins, but they don't really have the space here. The defenders have done a pretty good job of denying the attackers a good position to use their projectiles here late on. It's just the quality question which has been asked, and has so far left the defenders found wanting. Chanting away here, the Witch-Run Scourge Raiders, but you're very unlikely to rout units like Daelian Royal Guard and Guards of Khazad-dûm without also absolutely butchering them in melee, and that's very unlikely to happen, especially in the case of the Dwarven unit. They don't have really much left to commit either. Those Witchers, 2 bodyguard units, slightly battered Drake Broodlings. It is, so far, looking like it's going to be a reclamation for Balin and his allies. The Guards of Khazad-dûm, I mean, when you get up close to them, I kind of like the masks that they've got to them. So it's almost reminiscent of like a Cuman style, perhaps, but still quintessentially Dwarven. Snargy Skirmishers still doing their thing. His javelins definitely been one of the standout performers from the defenders, really. They will have racked up a nice kill count for themselves over the course of the battle. Of course the Witchers as well stand out, but perhaps not enough. Now return javelin fire as well, with a little bit more room given to them by the Royal Guard and the Guards of Khazad-dûm. The Keldon River Patrol able to return with a javelin volley or 2 of their own, and targeting exactly the right thing in the Blackback Mountain Berserkers as well. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. As the javelins continue to rain down. Defeat for the Blackbacks. 23 of them. Black Bloc Engineers getting involved in melee. They're not actually that good in melee. The second hit point makes them a bit of a brick defensively, but their melee stats are certainly not up to the same sort of standards as other multiple HP Dwarven infantry units, so utilising them as such does come with its risks. Guards of Khazad-dûm really showing their strength here though, just punching their way through what remained of the defensive front line, defending general falls. The Daelian Paladins coming in now as well, and that's going to cause the collapse of what remains of the defenders over there. I can't imagine the Snaga are going to last too long in the face of a renewed column of attacking units. The Blackguards move in as a last-ditch effort. What happened to the one Witcher? Oh, he might be dead. You can see a Witcher's corpse distinct from everything else on the floor there. I'm sure that everyone will be rejoicing at the sight. The Witcher on Blackguard will be almost assuredly the last defending unit left standing. But yeah, it came down to quality here. In a 4v4 like this, when the forces of good have got a quality advantage on defenders, the low tier nature of the attackers, which very often the numbers of the attackers in the current version of the game it does make it difficult for the forces of good, the way that the meta is at the moment. Here though, we saw the other side of the coin. The forces of good with their more varied levels of quality, the front line having to rely almost entirely on numbers, trying to play the efficiency game for the defenders, and it ended up not working out, even with the Witchers doing their thing. Although it is worth saying that the most deadly blow the Witchers landed also caused a lot of friendly fire and made that front line significantly more rickety outside the walls. It wasn't the reason the defenders lost by any means, but it did make the panic button of the Witchers less effective than it can often be. The Sindar of the Girdle hoping to add a few more kills to what is almost assuredly a pretty substantial number already. And here we have it. Dalian Paladins still alive. Almost all of them. A few of them will be killed off, the Dragon Slayers with their anime swords. Another point of contention, perhaps. I think it's about time that we times two'd our way through the rest of this. The Guards of Khazad-dûm have taken losses, but definitely the unit which really showcased their strength more than any other on the final road to victory here. And the attackers will be quite pleased with this. Consistent punishment they've taken throughout, but they have reached the summit. And Moria will fall, albeit temporarily, back into Dwarven hands. What's going on then? What is still alive? Is it just one unit that refuses to die? One individual? No? There's still a commotion in there. There has to be something still alive. No? What are they doing? There's still the noises of battle, so there must be something. Ah, there he is. Yes, it's the Angmarim general. Coming down south to help their goblin allies, but ultimately to no avail. If the Balrog were to climb up from the depths at this point, it would get a little bit messy. But there we have it. Good battle, that. A different take on Moria. This surely is the last we will see of this version of the interior of Moria, but at least it was framed with a more interesting exterior battle this time than we would normally see from this area. And also most of Moria wasn't actually utilised, it was just the first little corridor really. The bridge wasn't even taken into account by the defenders, and maybe it should have been. Maybe if they retreated back over to here, but it would have given more room for like the attacking skirmishers to be used, so I don't know. Perhaps there was no hope once the battle actually started to take place within Moria. I think the battle was already well and truly in the attackers' favour. As far as what the defenders could have done differently, I don't know. I mean, the friendly fire from the Witchers, like I say, it was unfortunate, but they did just as much damage to the enemy, if not slightly more, so I wouldn't say that that was a problem. Their own artillery wasn't as effective as the attacking ones. Maybe their cavalry could have been used a little bit more aggressively and on the front foot, because they did ultimately have the edge there. If they consolidated 2 Bolgs champions, 1 Warg skirmisher and 1 Witch Realm Inquisitor, they would have had the fast mover advantage. But in the end, that didn't really turn out to be the case. The Hammer Guard were dealt with, but the Sindar of the Girdle were a constant presence throughout the whole battle. And as much as many of their kills from Hidden Zed will have come from picking off routing units, they wouldn't have been able to do that if not for the fact that if they had been picked off earlier, and then there could have been returning from routing units in their hundreds. Low tier though they may have been, that could have been enough to turn the battle around. Better cavalry play perhaps. It's difficult though, because it was very much quality versus quantity on the front line, and the quantity was found wanting in this situation because, again, you can't just have low tier units and expect them to do the business. I mean, the Halberdiers will do some heavy lifting, the armour piercing on the spears, etc, etc, but there's going to be a point where ultimately you're just not going to have the quality to match. You need the occasional unit of quality in there as well. Maybe that could have been a way that Angmar could have built their army differently. They could have gone fully quality focused, maybe. Instead of going for like Orc Fellas and Angmarim units, you could have gone for more Guardians of Khan Doom to really help shore things up. But again, ifs, ands, buts and maybes. I think the attackers were worth their victory here. They started attacking and then they were consistent about it. They weren't singing from different hymn sheets. They were a unified force, and that often is a big difference maker. And in a 4v4, the attackers have to work more than they do in a 5v3. So worthy victors here. Let's see what did the damage for the 3 Misty Mountains armies then. The Blackback Berserkers, as the battle entered its final phases, went down swinging. The Bolg Champions did okay, to be fair, as much as the I think the cavalry could have been used slightly more effectively. They still did a decent job. The Heavy Goblin Crossbows, 95 is maybe not enough in this kind of situation. 193 certainly is, but 95, you're going to be needing more, I think. It kind of depends on what they were killing, but numbers-wise, maybe a bit more. Snaga Skirmishers, like I said, probably the standout performers from all of the defending units, to be fair. They were a consistent thorn in the attacker's side. And then, yeah, Snaga Skirmishers here doing the business. Heavy Goblin Crossbows for this army more consistently doing bits as well. The infantry, though, less impressive, and that is the difference here. The supporting units did okay, but the infantry, you can see how they were mostly bullied by the quality of especially the Dwarven units among them. White Turret Fearmongers doing okay, though. The Black Uruks, once again, proving their worth. Snaga Skirmishers also. So yeah, nothing too surprising there. Big thank you to Tommy the Wise for sending this battle in, and a big thank you to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. I know that Tommy has sent me another battle, which I will be doing in the coming weeks as well. Should be out within December. The next battle that we shall see will be a continuation of the historical battle series that Lord of Belagost has been slowly drip-feeding me. So we will be seeing another one of those. This time it will be Gondor's invasion of Umbar from the port of Pelagia. So that should be very nice. That will be the next battle, the very next battle that we see. I've got another one from him as well. Still got a couple from Winged Swordsman. 2 times sent me a huge clutch of replays as well that I can make my way through. So I've got a big backlog when it comes to the current version of Reforged to be dealing with, which should see me through all of December and most of January, to be fair, if I were to only do Reforged as well. And there may well be a Silmarillion battle or 2 mixed in there. Of course, if I get anything from the new patch, that jumps quickly to the front of the queue, so that's the sort of thing which I can't really account for easily. As for what's happening overall, the topic of the would-be live stream, which still keeps getting pushed back, that could change quickly. Again, it's one of those situations which is developing, really. We'll see. Something will happen at some point, I promise. I've been speaking about it most of this year, and it still hasn't fully materialised in concrete form, but it is what it is. For now, we continue as we are, and the content will continue to flow. So yeah, big thanks to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.